Hey there, I'm Dad. Welcome to the first video on more advanced in-depth speedrun mechanics for RCT 1 and 2. In this video, I want to discuss how park rating plays a factor in speedruns, the positives and the negatives. The very basics of park rating were discussed in the beginner's speedrun guide video. If you haven't watched that on my channel yet, I've linked it in the description. I'll be utilizing some terminology that was introduced in that video, as this focuses on more specific advanced speedrun details. Park rating is essential to completion of most RCT scenarios, usually by maintaining a certain rating by the scenario end date. While the number itself varies by a scenario, it's typically 600 or more. Now, park rating can provide incredible benefits to your speedruns as it provides greater RNG for guest generation at higher levels, reaching its peak performance at 850 park rating or above. However, in longer scenarios, park rating can be a ticking time bomb, and you may feel you're racing against the clock to keep it at a certain level. See, there are plenty of ways to raise your park rating, but there are many ways that can plummet as well, and being cognizant of both the positive and negative influences of park rating is imperative to performing well-timed runs. We're going to go over the good and bad of park rating in this video, as well as discuss ways to influence park rating increases and mitigate park rating bombs. Behind the curtain in the game's code is a constant calculation of what your park rating number should be. I'll be utilizing some data compiled by Dirklink to provide deeper insight. The influencers are as follows: the difficulty of the park, which is only present in a few scenarios, mostly in loopy landscapes, the number of guests in your park, the number of happy guests, the number of guests who are lost and can't find the exit, the ride uptime, your average excitement and intensity of all of your rides, the total excitement and intensity of all your rides, litter, and casualties. Now, each of these influencers are not created equal, and some have such a minuscule impact on the current meta of speedrunning that I'm not going to discuss them in this video. But the influencers of import are the number of guests in your park, the number of happy guests, the total excitement and intensity of all your rides, and number of guests lost, with litter making an honorable mention. You may notice casualties aren't on this priority list because, well, it should come as no surprise you don't want people to die in your park. The rating calculation for most scenarios begins at 1,150, which is the value that influencers add or subtract from. This is going to be the basis of our understanding. Don't get too hung up on that number, as it's more important to understand the value that each of these influencers provides overall. This one's pretty obvious, as it serves two benefits: increasing your park rating, but also fulfilling the scenario's goals for your speedrun. Obviously, the point of speedrun in this game is to get guests in the park as fast as possible, but it does go to show that really good openers and starts are crucial in not only getting guests in the park, but raising your park rating so you can maintain that pace throughout the entire run. At any given time, the number of guests in your park is counted and divided by 13. Note, if your guest count is 2,000 or higher, the numerator will default to 2,000 always and never go higher. When you receive this number, the game subtracts 150 from its value. The value will be anywhere from -150 to +3. This number is then added to the initial park rating value, that 1,150 I mentioned earlier. For example, to keep the math simple, let's assume you have 260 guests in your park. You would first divide 260 by 13, receiving a 20 as your result. That 20 would be subtracted by the given value of 150, and your total park rating impact is -130. For the sake of understanding, assuming there are no other impacts to your initial park rating of 1,150, your park rating value would be 1,020 as a result. Suffice it to say, as your speedruns progress, the more guests you accumulate, the greater your park rating will become. It's important to remember that this influencer can only provide a benefit from -150 to +3 park rating to your park. And while it's not the largest amount of impact provided by the influencers, it's one of the earliest influencers you can manage in your run. In order to influence the number of guests in your park, make sure to focus on the following. Advertising. Each ad campaign runs independent of your soft guest cap generation. Always keep ads running, as they will continuously generate guests regardless of your soft guest cap. And then increase your soft guest cap with ride creation. Build more rides to ensure that your guest cap level is always above your actual guest count. One of the higher values impacting park rating influencers is number of happy guests. A happy guest is someone with over 50% happiness. This influencer automatically takes 500 away from your initial park rating, which is a staggering number. To calculate the impact, the number of happy guests is multiplied by 300 and then divided by the total amount of guests. If this value is over 250, then 250 will be used by default, and this value will never go higher. This number is then multiplied by 2 and added to the negative 500 starting value. Thus, mathematically, if 83% of your guests are happy, you will not lose any park rating, and this influencer's value will be 0. Okay, Dad, that's a lot of information, but what does it actually mean? So let's take an example. Let's say you have 120 happy guests and 400 total guests. You would multiply the happy guests 120 by 300, which comes to 36,000. Then you would divide that by your total number of guests, which is 400. This equals 90. Take that 90 and multiply it by 2 to get 180. Then you would add this 180 to that base park rating impact of negative 500. And now your park rating hit will only be negative 320. It may seem like this isn't beneficial, but try to frame the understanding of park rating that any impact you make on these metrics is actually just lessening the park rating impact that the game initially throws at you. As you can see, this is a large value, and making sure guests are happy is crucial. What's more, this particular metric scales equally with the number of guests in your park. The denominator of this metric is always the number of guests in your park. And since you will achieve maximum value from this influencer if 83% of your guests are happy, this is a park rating influencer that can be equally manipulated at the beginning of a run, the middle, and the end. Thus, making sure your guests are happy is absolutely crucial to achieving a high park rating and good times on your runs. Happiness is something that decreases over time for a guest, or decreases due to hunger, thirst, or bathroom needs. But it can be increased by riding a ride, walking by an entertainer, or thinking happy thoughts. These are fairly simplistic ways to raise your total happy guests. Building accessible rides that guests can ride makes total sense to increase happiness. However, one that may initially go unnoticed and is paramount to the speedrun of this game are entertainers. Now, there is some runner preference to the timing and priority of entertainers over rides, but it should be noted that entertainers can provide an incredible buff to guest happiness in numbers. You see, entertainers will contribute 3 points to a guest happiness when they interact with any guest in a 3x3 tile space. If 2 entertainers interact at the same time in this space, it would add 6 points. If 3, 9 points, so on and so forth. You can see where I'm going with this. Entertainers in a small enough space, when amassed to high numbers, can provide a massive boon to guest happiness. You will often see in some speedrun openers early on that runners will add 10 or so entertainers near the entrance of a park. This is so that, immediately upon entering the park, guests are interacting with entertainers and are gaining benefit from the happiness generation. As runs go on longer and guests may spread across the park, adding more and more entertainers is crucial to maintaining a high park rating. This makes entertainers, in most scenarios, the most important staff to hire. However, it's important to note that in a run like Forest Frontiers, where you may not expand your initial park path past what is already provided, guests will be receiving the stacking benefits of multiple entertainers. Yet, being confined in space with other guests will make them think that the park is crowded. These negative thoughts will have an impact on guest happiness, but more entertainers can mitigate that impact. This park rating calculation can be an easy value win for you to achieve in your runs, and in some cases is truly indicative of your speed. The calculation is identical to the average EI calculator. Total EI multiplied by 100 and divided by 8. However, if your total excitement and intensity ratings in the park are both over 80, your park rating will receive no penalty. Thus, you will see some runners take the strategy of spamming cheap, gentle, or thrill rides very quickly in order to reach this 80 value as soon as possible. 200 total park rating points are up for grabs with this particular influencer, and honestly, this might be where the speed of the runner in placing rides plays the largest role in impacting park rating. Now, there are a lot of methods that can be utilized to mitigate this influencer, and they truly depend on what's available on any given scenario's ride list. Obviously, not all rides are created equal, so building a mixture that is both within budget, but also feasible for the terrain to get up to 80 is crucial. Now, some scenarios may provide flat land that's easy to build on, and it really encourages you to spam to reach this amount, and it tends to be a route I like to take depending upon the rides available and cash on hand. For instance, if you were to spam spiral slides to 80 excitement and intensity value, you would need to construct a total of 57 slides for a cost of $18,810. That's assuming that the terrain is perfectly flat. This is a lot of clicks, but considering the cheap cost and it needing only a 3x2 land location, with entrance and exit included, it makes for a good option. Ultimately, there's still a lot of theory crafting to do in these strategies to optimize by scenario, but this is an influencer that can easily be mitigated. Now, when speedrunning this game, most of what you will do to impact park rating will be to provide positive benefit to the park. Very rarely do you need to do anything to fight negative park rating, with scenarios such as Ivory Towers, the litter-infested mess it is, being the exception. However, when you start to venture your speedrunning game into longer scenarios, there becomes the looming disaster in each run where guests just want to go home. And obviously, the goal of your speedrun is to get guests to come to the park and keep them there. But when guests can't find an exit because a sign is blocking them from leaving, they become lost, irritated, and honestly, a massive thorn in your side. When a guest is lost and wants to leave the park, nothing will bring them back to their senses but getting outside of those gates. When more than 25 guests start getting lost, that's when the bomb detonates, and you begin losing 7 park rating for each lost guest, a problem that spirals out of control incredibly fast. I first realized that this was a massive problem when I began running Trinity Islands, which was one of the first parks I encountered that went long enough to begin having lost guest issues. I tried lots of things to keep this from happening. I hired loads of entertainers, but the constant assault of grown men in stuffed panda costumes simply didn't provide the same level of comfort that one's own home does. I tried building more rides spread out around the park, but the spacing just created more time for guests to get tired and want to go home. However, I spent some time theory crafting and created a strategy for this speedrun that changed a lot of strategies for this scenario and really RCT speedrunning. Long queue lines, and I mean long queue lines, coupled with incredibly long operating times for rides. When guests are in a queue, they can't get lost. They're currently occupied by doing something else. And if you change the ride length to the longest possible, it will make queues longer. For instance, the merry-go-round can have a total of 25 rotations, and the scrambled eggs 18 rotations. This was the workaround that was needed for the community to begin optimizing these runs further without getting park rating bombed. However, guests may not get lost in long queue lines, but their happiness will begin to decrease over time the longer they wait. While this doesn't impact park rating to the same extreme that a park rating bomb of lost guests does, it does have a negative impact nonetheless. And this is where the army of panda bear entertainers comes into play. In RCT, you can set your entertainers to patrol specific tiles that they will constantly dance and entertain guests in. Guests can interact and receive happiness bones from entertainers even while they're in a line. Thus, guests will stay in lines longer without a happiness penalty. Therefore, hiring entertainers to patrol these queue lines can mitigate the negative park rating damage. While this strategy has truly changed the way that long scenarios are optimized, it isn't foolproof. Guests will need to desire riding some of the rides with long queues. You will need several rides with long queues if you have a lot of guests in your park, as it means you need to trap, for lack of a better term, guests in your queue lines. Currently, this strategy works well for runs somewhere between 9 to 20 minutes, 9 minutes being roughly the time that guests start getting lost if there are no guests in your park at the start of a scenario. Park rating bombs are, in my opinion, the biggest hurdle to truly optimizing RCT speedruns, as they can end runs faster than anything else. While the queue line strategy has shed some light on combating the park rating bomb, there is a further need to theorycraft and develop new strategies to fight against park rating bombs in longer scenarios. An honorable mention is litter. Litter serves a bigger detriment in longer term speedruns. The shorter scenarios under 10 minutes may not be impacted fiercely by litter, as the runtime is so darn fast. Litter, however, is an incredibly easy park rating value to manage if you build enough trash cans and hire enough handymen that don't mow grass. The calculation begins at 0, but can subtract a total of 600 points from your park rating. Every piece of litter subtracts 4 from your total park rating. One particular scenario of note that demands you control litter is Ivory Towers, where your park begins in an absolutely disgusting state. Hiring handymen in the scenario is crucial to generation of park value, but in most scenarios, you're not going to see much impact. And those are the major items of import to know about park rating and its impact on speedrunning. What we know about how park rating is calculated may remain static, but the community is still finding new ways to optimize how we can increase park rating or mitigate its negative impacts. Understanding what contributes to park rating is key in establishing consistent high-level runtimes in your speedruns. However, we may understand the calculations well, but the community is still in an exploratory phase on how to potentially mitigate the negative impacts to park rating, such as park rating bombs. I'm hopeful that as the community around this game and speedrun grows, new strategies and theories will be tested to further improve long runs and prevent park rating bombs. Thank you as always for watching the video. If you have any questions or ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'd be happy to discuss. Thanks.